Justice and Peace Commission for inviting me to speak tonight, and of course I'd like to thank all of you for coming out to this event. My name is Jay Amato, and I'm representing the Pikes Peak chapter of the United Nations Association, or UNA. Now, UNA is a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization, and our main purpose is to do whatever we can to support the good United Nations efforts for peace. If any of you would like to learn a little more about UNA, I'd be glad to talk to you about it afterwards. Now, World Environment Day, which we're celebrating tonight, was established in 1972 by a resolution of the United Nations General Assembly. And its major purpose was to stimulate worldwide awareness of environmental problems and to promote political action where appropriate. The UN has a long history of environmental activism. It has served as the forum for over 1,000 international treaties concerning environmental problems. Now, obviously, I don't have time to get into that in any depth, but I would like to just briefly mention a few of the milestones in that history to give you an idea of the scope of United Nations action. In 1973, there was the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. 1987, the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. 1988 was the formation of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. 1989, the Basel Convention on Hazardous Wastes. 1992, the Convention on Biological Diversity. 2000, the Cartagena Protocol on Genetically Modified Organisms. 2002, the World Summit on Sustainable Development. So you can see from these few examples that the UN environmental mandate has been a very broad one, and there have been some notable successes. But tonight, I'd like to talk to you about one very conspicuous failure. The Kyoto Protocol of 1997, which tried to limit the emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Now, the biggest problem has been the action, or rather, I should say, the inaction of the United Nations' most powerful member, our own country. The United States has shamefully dragged its feet on this issue. The Clinton administration actually signed on to the Kyoto Treaty, but never submitted it to the Senate for ratification. The Bush administration refused to support the treaty at all. Their major problem? Well, the treaty tried to limit the emissions of gases, of greenhouse gases from the industrialized countries, but did not apply to the developing nations. And so, of course, that's unfair. Well, now think about that from the point of view of the developing nations, because it seems to them that it's more than a bit hypocritical. How did those industrialized nations get to be industrialized in the first place? Well, they grew their economies in large measure by burning prodigious quantities of fossil fuels without worrying about the consequences. And as a result, our citizens have grown prosperous, and we've come to enjoy our big automobiles and air conditioners and flat-screen TVs. Well, now the people in India and China are beginning to wonder why they shouldn't have automobiles and TVs. Well, we're telling them, you can't grow your economy the way we did ours because you have to limit emissions. In other words, we're telling them, do as we say, not as we do. Now, for some strange reason, this logic has been rather unpersuasive to the nations of the developing world. But the good news is we probably don't have to make that argument ourselves anymore, because Mother Nature is taking over the burden of making that argument for us. The effects of global warming are becoming just too obvious to ignore. We see the glaciers disappearing from Glacier National Park. Polar bears are drowning in the Arctic because the ice cover is less extensive every year. The hurricanes on the Atlantic and Gulf coasts are becoming larger and more dangerous because of the warmer surface waters. Likewise, in the West, the forest fires are becoming more devastating because of the extensive drought conditions. And right here in Colorado, we see our magnificent pine forests being decimated by bark beetles because the warmer winters are no longer killing them off. I could go on, but how much evidence does it take to convince us that something drastic is going on with our planet? Mother Nature is practically beating us over the head with a 2x4 to get our attention, and still we do nothing. Now I'd like to talk for a minute about the nation of the Maldives. Now the Maldives is a country that consists of a string of small islands in the Indian Ocean, and the average elevation above sea level is something like 4 feet. If the ocean level were to rise by even a modest amount, far less than the current predictions, that will generate catastrophic storm surges that will make those islands virtually uninhabitable. The president of the Maldives is actually looking for land to purchase in some other country with the idea of eventually relocating the entire population of 300,000 people. That's how seriously he takes global warming. Samuel Johnson once noted that nothing so wonderfully concentrates the mind as the knowledge that you are about to be hanged. We're all hoping that this logic will apply to the representatives of the various nations of the world that will be meeting in Copenhagen this December to negotiate the successor to the Kyoto Treaty. Now, they must understand that our present course is unsustainable. Think about it now. The fossil fuels that we're burning today have been laid down over geological time spans of hundreds of millions of years. And here we are, depleting those resources within the space of a few human lifetimes. That's not even the blink of an eye in geological time. And as we burn up those fossil fuels, we're poisoning our air, land, and water. How short-sighted and selfish and irresponsible is that? Future generations will wonder what we were thinking and why we were asleep at the switch. Now, it's not as if we have a choice about switching to renewable sources of energy. You can't fool Mother Nature, and sooner or later she's going to take that decision out of our hands because a fixed and finite supply of fossil fuels cannot last forever. It's as simple as that. So the question is not whether we will switch to renewables, but when. We can try to do it as quickly as possible and try to preserve as much as we can of our natural environment. Or we can do as we have been doing. Do nothing unless you absolutely have to the further degradation of our environment. And then, of course, we wind up in the same place anyway. We need prompt action, but we can't wait for a perfect solution because there are no perfect solutions. But our country has the greatest resources and the greatest technology. It's our responsibility to take the lead and show some initiative in this matter so that it will be easier for other nations to climb aboard. After all, you can't get a team of sled dogs in motion if the lead dog is still asleep.